RCS, we provide technical and financial assistance to private landowners that want to improve management of their property. It could be on pasture, it can be irrigated, it can be for wildlife, riparian areas, anything. But we focus on private lands and start with conservation planning and help look for opportunities to improve things, and then we can help you find cost share in some instances if there's a really good project that you want to pursue. So that's kind of what I do. Mostly it's folks call and they say, this is something I want to work on, can you come out and take a look? And we take a look and then we go from there to try to develop projects. So today I'm going to kind of be talking specifically about small pasture, but I know some of you guys have larger pasture, and it's the concepts that we're going to be talking about are all the same. We're going to start kind of just looking at real basic fundamentals, then go into some of the management principles and practices that you might want to consider, and then, like Sonny was saying, Melissa Sherwin has been awesome and is letting us take a look at her place. We're going to go through a case study quickly and look at the soils, plant production, and maybe come up with some ideas of what's available and how you could best use it. PowerPoint's tough. I don't want it to be monotonous. I don't want you guys to get bored. Please stop me and ask questions, and we can go off on tangents. That's fine. I tried to put this together as an outline to cover a wide variety of things, but any of them can be fleshed out a lot. When I used to do this in Bozeman, this was like a 5 or 6 class course, and so to try to compile it all into an hour and a half is tough. There's so much to it. So please stop me and go in any direction you want. I don't care at all. So with that, when we get started, we're going to, like I said, the first part, section 1, is just the fundamentals, the interaction between plants, soils, and animals. So there's nothing more fundamental than photosynthesis. And for some of you, that may be, obviously this is how it all works. But this is the basis of everything I do, is photosynthesis. So we take energy from the sun and turn that into carbon. And everything else we do is a function of that, whether it's, on your pasture or producing hay, or if you've got stream issues, all of that is related to this and the ability to take that energy and fix carbon, and everything else trickles down from there. So it's really important to understand this. Not all the different cycles that are going on in systems, but plant takes in carbon dioxide, it uses sunlight to combine carbon molecules to make sugar. And then that feeds the rest of the system, whether it's your animal or whether it's all the critters in the soil. That sugar's leaking out of the roots. Those animals are then cycling nutrients as a result of that. So it's all tied together, but this is where it starts, with carbon dioxide and energy. So pasture health is then a function of the interaction between the above ground and the below ground. So you've got your plants on top, and then you've got your soil. And these are both incredibly complex systems, and they're always talking back and forth to each other. In between is what you do, whether it's animals or whether it's your irrigation or it's pesticide, herbicides, all those things you're doing in between here are influencing both of these in those cycles. So on the plant side, what does it do for you? Well, it's provides the cover for that soil to keep your soil in place, keep it active, keep it healthy. They're taking that carbon out of the air and turning it into organic matter, which is critical for everything else. Nutrients, plants, depending on what size, your legumes, they can actually fix nitrogen out of the air that then feeds your grass. So they're capturing nutrients. Plants help build your soil structure. They help filter water, and then they provide the competition that's going to keep out the plants you don't want. On the other side of it, the soil is a growth medium. You can't have, the plants have no place to grow without at least some soil. As we know around here, a lot of times there isn't very much to work with, but there's still something as a growth medium. It's a nutrient source. So your parent material, your rock, is breaking down, and there's some of the nutrients that these plants need are coming out of that parent material. Water storage, your soil is 100% responsible for storing the water that these plants need. If you don't have organic matter and you don't have soil structure, that water is just going to disappear, as it would if you poured it over gravel, for say. The soil microbes, they cycle the nutrients. So they take this carbon that the plants are creating, they break it down and make it available again for the next generation of plants. And there's millions of them. I mean, you take a handful of soil and it's just thriving. There's 6 billion microbes in a handful of healthy, good soil. So, and they all have different jobs, but they're all critical for keeping this plant cover alive. So there's that constant feedback. Then structure again. So plants are creating structure with their roots. but the soil microbes are actually gluing soil particles together, which also builds structure, and that's what you need so the water and the air can move there and have spots to bind to. And then again, the soil acts as a filter. So the water that's coming down, whether it's through irrigation or rain, healthy soil filters that water. Whereas if you didn't have it there, it can go right through and it takes nutrients through and leaches them into our groundwater, surface water. So this is the system. There's so much to it, and I hope I didn't just glaze over it, but I think everything you do, if you can keep this in mind, that you've got the above ground, the below ground, and they're interacting, and you want to help them maintain both of these as healthy as possible, then this is the foundation of everything else you do, whether it's weed management, whether it's livestock management, all these things come back to this interaction between the soil and the plants. So, like in the middle there was animals, right? And so they influence both the soil and the plant community dramatically. It can be really good, but it can also be negative. And so just real quickly on the positive side, you've got nutrient cycling. When your livestock is eating that grass or eating that forb, whatever it may be, they're then defecating, and that's part of the nutrient cycle. They're taking that carbon and making it available for the soil microbes, which will then feed it back into the next generation of plants. So herbivores are really good for that. They also are going to trample grass. They're going to trample plants on the ground where they're available for microbes to then grab them, break it down, and put it back in the system. So they're great for that. Seed contact, when your grasses seed out, the seeds eventually are going to end up on the soil surface, and they can dry out really quick or they can get eaten by birds. But when you involve livestock, they're going to mash those into the ground. They're going to get good contact with the moist soil where they're able to germinate. So they can be really good for helping reseed in areas where perhaps that's not going on. They encourage diversity. Livestock does. When they're involved, they're going to preferentially eat certain things, and that's going to allow an opportunity for other plants to come into the system. They feed the soil critters, like I said, by mashing down the plants, but also through feces and urine. And then they stimulate growth. With a lot of grasses, it's kind of like your lawn. You know, when you mow it, they respond quickly. They put on new, lush, healthy growth. And that happens too with grazing. Grazing is good for grass. If it's done in a thoughtful manner, it's really good for grass. A lot of grasses have evolved with grazers for thousands and thousands of years. So that's really good for them. If they're left alone for too long, there can actually be problems and the grass can actually go downhill. So grazing can be really positive. On the other side, we've all seen how it can be really negative, and I don't need to dwell on that. You can cause physical damage to your property or to stream banks, things like that. If you take too much of the top growth, and I'll show you some of this later, you start to lose root growth, and that's kind of the root of all these problems. But you can eliminate diversity. So if there's one species that animal prefers and it's allowed to just graze it over and over and over, well, it's going to be removed from the system. So you're losing diversity in your plant community. If nothing's left for the soil, the livestock can starve your soil critters. Your whole ecosystem below ground needs food too, and if you take it all off with livestock, well, then there's nothing going back into the system. And then if they're really confined, you can have problems with salts and nutrients being concentrated, which can change your soil chemically. So those are both sides. Again, remember, this is in between your soil and your plants. These animals are having these interactions all the time and driving that stuff. It can be positive or it can cause some problems. It's important to note when we're talking about herbivores that they're all really different. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is really general, just kind of as far as these interactions. But it's gonna depend on what animal that you're dealing with. How many of you guys have cattle? Cattle. You guys have bison, so those are different right there. How many of you just are dealing with wildlife? You got deer, elk that you're feeding. Goats? Sheep? Absolutely. Chickens? Right, so all these animals have some overlap, but they also have differences in terms of what they need and what they want, and then how they're able to gather that feed. So a cow feeds differently than a horse does, partially based upon their mouth. They also process that feed differently because of their rumen. Their digestive system is different. So there's differences in efficiencies. There's also differences in their impact on that grass plant. So an animal with teeth on top and bottom can get right up to the crown of a plant and can cause quite a bit more damage to that individual plant than a grazer that doesn't have teeth on the top and is coming at it sideways and peeling the grass like that. Just by nature, it's going to leave more residual to protect that plant. So when you're planning your grazing, you need to think about that and think about the animals, what they're wanting to eat, how they're eating it, and what the impact of that's going to be on your plant community. So I don't want to, again, won't dwell on it too much, but always think about these things in terms of your animals and how their impact is going to vary and how it might be different than your neighbors or different than what I'm even talking about based off of these things here. And please, I know I'm going fast, but I have a lot of stuff, so stop me on any of this if you have questions or you want to flesh something out here a little bit more. So on the other side of that coin, you know, the animals behave differently, they graze differently, which is going to impact your pasture differently. But also whatever is in your pasture is going to respond differently to that grass, or to that grazing. So there's all sorts of different characteristics of your plants that are going to determine how they react to grazing. We've got cool season and warm season grasses here. So a lot of our cool season grasses are bunch grasses. And I brought some examples of ones you guys probably would recognize. This is crested wheatgrass, so it's a bunch grass. It grows in a really tight bunch. It's self-explanatory. You can see this is already greening up because it's crested wheat. And crested wheat likes the spring. It gets going really early before a lot of our others do. Another bunch grass here, and this is kind of a mixture of things here, but we've got blue bunch wheatgrass mixed in with a blue grama here, which are both natives. The blue bunch is a bunch grass, obviously blue bunch. The blue grama is a warm season sod forming or rhizomatous grass. And so they're all mixed together here. You can see one of them's greening up and one of them isn't. But again, so they're going to respond differently to grazing. One of them's not even awake yet. The other one's actively growing. Another one here, this is a little fescue, and you can see he's up and at him. This is about as big as he's going to get, and the deer have already munched him off pretty close. But he's going to respond differently, say, than the blue bunch.
I'm going to pass them around.
Though I can pass the whole thing around.
Okay.
And then finally, this is a rhizomatous grass called smooth brome. You guys probably are really familiar with it. It's greening up too, and you look, the root system is totally different on this. It's a root spreader, it's a sod former, it just creeps and it pops up from rhizomes. It doesn't grow in a bunch. So again, it's going to respond differently to grazing than maybe your bunch grasses would because it doesn't need to produce seed to reproduce. So it's got a whole different way of living. So I'll pass those around just so you can kind of see the differences. But the point being, when you're thinking about grazing, you got to think about the animals, but also about what you have out there, because there is no kind of general rule. All these grasses are going to respond this way or that way. So when I get into the management principles, remember, those are general, but it has to be fine-tuned based off what species you're dealing with. Also, I threw up here cheatgrass. Right now, a lot of the green that you see around here is cheatgrass. And it responds to grazing way different than any of these other things. It really doesn't care. It's an annual, so it's just going to do its thing. If it gets grazed, it gets grazed. So just keep that in mind. As those are going around, if you want to know what one of those is or any more information, just hold it up and ask me. It's hard to find plants this time of year, a real good representative sample, so it's kind of a sparse collection. I apologize. In the summer, you get a lot more cool bunch grasses around here. So here's a little bit just to kind of show you the grass, how it grows and the structure of a grass plant. You've got your root system. Again, it's either going to be a bunch or it's going to be a sod-forming rhizomatous grass, which just creeps. And you'll see big, heavy, thick rhizomes that come off of that. You've got your nodes. Those are your growth points. And that's really important to know about your grass because if you look at this, if your growing point is at the crown of the plant, so and this can vary between species and time of year. If your growing point is right here and that plant's growing and it gets munched, well, it can just keep growing from those growing points. But if the growing point is elevated and it gets munched right here, that plant now has to restart from the bottom. It's not going to be able to grow like this one, just push those up. It's going to have to start all the way back here and regrow. So that might be important to know or understand about your grass when you're planning your grazing and looking at how much you've used and maybe how much more you have to have available. So there's your basic grass.
So it's the leaf node that is the growing point?
The node is your growing point, right? So your tiller will start to come up and you'll probably get 3 or 4 leaves, and then it'll start to grow from there. And then from that node, it's going to grow more leaves, and so it's going to keep growing up. In some species, that growing point remains low, like a Kentucky bluegrass. And so it can take getting grazed over and over and over. But a lot of our native bunch grasses, our more desirable forage grasses, that node, that growth point might be elevated. And so when you take that off, then it stopped growth for quite a while. It's got to start at the bottom again and go through the whole process. All right, so this is my favorite picture here. The root of most pasture problems, so people call me about weeds, they call me about gophers, they call me about erosion or just poor forage production. All these things stem from this right here, undoubtedly. So as you take more and more grass off the top, the root system has to shrink on a plant. There's a balance between above ground and below ground. They mirror each other. If you don't have enough solar panels up here, you can't maintain your root system. It's just the way a grass goes. So when you take more and more, that root system has to shrink. Therefore, that plant can't access water and nutrients. So, because it just doesn't have enough root system to do it. And so then you get the problems. Production goes down, the quality of the feed goes down, you don't have as much material on the surface to prevent erosion, you get more mud, you get parasites because the animal's having to put its face right in the ground to try to get something to eat, and so it's taking in worms, it's taking in all the critters in the soil. And then you get weeds because there's bare ground between your grass plants because they just don't have enough roots to get the things they need and be healthy and happy and shade out the weeds. So this is a study that was done in the 50s, and this guy went to all these different pastures and collected samples of different grass species to show that this is what was going on. As you graze it harder and harder and harder, you lose your roots. And it's often cited as far as take half, leave half. This is the study where that comes from. But it's some of the best science, and it's just kind of been tucked away. And we've got fancy statistics and all this stuff going on in research right now, but this tells it all right here. So what happens as you move from that healthy plant to less healthy plant, your plant community shifts. And so people say, gosh, I've been seeing a lot more of this plant and I don't want it, or a lot more of that plant. Well, it's because your plant community is changing. As the desirable grasses get less vigorous, it just opens the door for other things to move in that don't necessarily need the same amount of water or the same amount of resources, whether it's sunlight or whatever it may be. You're opening a niche and something else is going to fill it because that's what nature does. So typically what we see around here is our desirable state in a native range or an introduced dryland range. We would see medium bunch grasses and some shrubs, small shrub component, but your blue bunch wheatgrass, your needle grasses, your fescues, all these things would be desirable, good forage, keep the ground covered. We would expect 10 to 15% bare ground maybe, depending on precip. Your higher precip levels, 5 to 10% bare ground. So as those plants get, as that plant community starts to change, you get more bare ground and you get your short bunch grasses. So you'll see more, we see a lot more sandbird bluegrass, which is a native, but it doesn't produce very much, it's tiny. We'll see more blue grama. We'll see a lot more prairie June grass, which again is a native bunch grass, but it's just not very productive compared to needle grass or say blue bunch, these things. So you start to see this shift. If things get bad, then it starts to go to a shrub-dominated annual grass situation. So you see a lot, you'll see some areas that are like a lot of broom snakeweed, for example, or a lot of rabbit brush and no real grass understory. Well, that's probably a medium bunch grass, would have been a medium bunch grass community a long time ago, but it's shifted. It's made these shifts based on those shrinking root system and the plants getting unable to compete with these other things that the grazers don't necessarily like. They don't eat broom snakeweed, so it's able to compete very, very well because life is good. Whereas if its next door neighbor is getting munched over and over and over, well, he can't really compete with that snakeweed. So this is what happens. Eventually, this community starts to shift to things that are less and less palatable, maybe even toxic, You get more weeds, and then you have less native species, more introduced species. I threw these pictures in here because this is the same soil. It's not the same pasture, but that's the same ecological site. And this isn't even in its best condition. That's mostly needle and thread, which is a native bunch grass, but it's not incredibly productive, and it's not very palatable because it has a huge awn on the seed. But this went from a medium bunch grass to more of a needle and thread dominated, but on the same soil in a different pasture. Look at it now. It's shifted all the way down to this shrub, annual grass, kind of in between short grasses, and you can see the amount of bare ground is just unbelievable. And so that's the same soil, same preset, but this is that progression that happens as things are thrown out of balance. If you go back to that first slide, you got your plant community and your soil community. And when things aren't working, they're not, cycling back and forth properly, you get these shifts.
Dan, can you recommend a good book for farmers?
I will. I've got a bunch of them that I'm going to show. So eventually, this is where weeds come in. So you open up these niches, you create this opportunity for other plants to come into the community that most likely aren't palatable. So therefore, they can come in and life is pretty good. That's when we have weed problems. And that's what we get a lot of calls about, and a lot of people wanting to address on both large and small pastures is weeds. And that's just what's happened. Your plant community has shifted for one reason or another. It may be animals, it may be other things. And now weeds are a part of that mix. So nature's Band-Aid, that's what nature does. It doesn't want bare ground. No matter what, it's trying to avoid bare ground. And so it finds ways to cover it up. And that might be knapweed, and that's really problematic for folks. And then it could be nuisance or noxious. So there's nuisance things, mustards and maybe cheatgrass that are a pain, but they can be dealt with. And then there's your noxious weeds, which is actually a legal definition of a weed that you have to be addressing because it has huge implications for our economy or our environment. It just comes down to a lack of competition. You need to provide good competition to keep weeds out. If it's not there, they're gonna come in because that's what nature does. They can change your soil. They can actually change the soil so that it makes it very difficult to get things back. A lot of our noxious weeds have allelopathic properties, so they exude chemicals out of their roots that make it difficult for the things we do want to grow there. It's just another one of the reasons they're so successful. Fire regime, they can change the fire regime. This is particularly true of cheatgrass, but there's other weeds that the same thing happens. They form monocultures and then they're make that system more prone to fire, which then has further changes. It's kind of a trickle down from there. And then there's all sorts of control options. And at the end, we can come back to weeds and talk about those, but it's such a huge topic that it could be its own class. If you have specific questions, definitely ask away. And like I said, if there's time at the end, we can focus on that. But also, we have a huge weed resource in the back. Melissa's here. If you ever have weed questions, she knows more about them than I do. Yes, you do. Yes, sir.
Can you address burning your fields, your pastures?
I can, yeah. So burning, it has its place in native systems because they evolved with burning from time to time. In introduced grasses or irrigated pasture, things of that nature, well, there's probably reasons to do it, and we'll get to that with the grazing. But for the most part, you're losing carbon, you're losing nutrients. They're just gone when you burn. So I would personally prefer to have those things in my soil so I can feed the next crop. If you burn, they're gone. You just gave them away. It also opens up a lot of bare ground, so if you already have weed problems, they're going to get worse if you create all these open niches for weeds to move into. That said, there's people that burn, that's part of their management, and they like that, and they make it work, and that's fine. Personally, I think I've seen it cause more problems than fixes, but I think it's a site-by-site basis. And again, some species respond great to fire, others don't. It takes them a long time, and so you leave that window open for invaders. And then it depends what your objectives are. Some shrubs, it's a way to get rid of shrubs. If you're trying to benefit, say, aspen, burning's a great way to get more aspen. So it all is going to depend on the species. And then again, so you've got weeds as one of those outcomes of that shift, and this would be the end of that progression. You end up with bare ground, which has huge implications for erosion, for soil temperature. If you have bare ground, that soil gets really, really hot. I take my little thermometer out in the summer and stick it under a bunch of grass and then outside, and it can be 20 degrees different. Well, that has a lot of implications for water. So if that soil is that hot, your water is going in the air, not into your plant. So temperature's big, infiltration. If you don't have grass to slow water down when we get a good rain, it's gone. It's down to the neighbors or down to the next state. You want grass to slow things down so it goes into your soil, not off of it. And then nutrient cycling, you need that cover to go back into the ground so it can get turned over and fed back to the next crop. And then mud. A lot of people say they've got mud issues. Well, mud is a result of no soil structure and no cover, so that water is creating problems. And so by keeping cover, avoiding bare ground, you're going to avoid these things. And again, this is that same picture, but you can see this is supposed to be 10%, we'd figure 10 to 15% bare ground. You can see it's clearly way, way more than that. So that has all these implications for that pasture. Yes?
On bare ground slopes, is that hydroseed very effective, or are there better ways?
That's probably your best bet if it's really steep and it's like a really poor soil, probably decomposed granite or something that's really coarse. It's very, very hard to get things reestablished in that. You'll find native sites that are like that, and they've had such a huge span of time to get established that eventually they do it. In our lifetime, and hydroseeding is probably the best way to try to get those stabilized.
What's hydroseed?
It's basically you've got a big cannon that shoots a mixture of organic matter, water, and seed. So it creates a better environment for that seed. It expands the window for germination rather than if you just put a seed on dry soil and then gamble on rain. All right, so that's the fundamentals, and I know I zoomed through it and I get excited about this stuff, but all that's really critical to then planning your management and looking at these management principles, because you got to understand why you're doing things, or it's just a pain in the neck. But if you're always thinking about organic matter and keeping your soil covered and building soil, then a lot of these things aren't as much of a chore, because you're thinking, oh, this is great, this is going to benefit my soil, this is going to be nutrients 2 years from now, this is going to be water in August when this soil over here can't hold anymore, mine can because I've built organic matter. So all that is underlying all of this, and these things are real general management principles, but if you understand those fundamentals and you're always thinking about those when you make a decision, you're going to be in really good shape. They're going to vary depending on your pasture layout, your grass species, your animal species, and everything, but those underlying concepts don't change no matter what, where you are, or what you're growing, or what you're feeding. So the things that you want to think about, or that you have control over in trying to build carbon, build soil, keep your soil covered, are timing. So when are you grazing and for how long? Utilization, so how much are you taking? Your feed-forage balance, so what do you have to use? How much do you need? And how do you offset any differences there? Rest, how do you find a way to give those plants rest? Because that's really what they want. Season of use, the implications of dormant season grazing, then setting up a rotation to make all these things work together. We'll look at some basic pasture layouts, and then monitoring. Monitoring is huge. If there's one thing you can do, if you wanted to start today to improve your pasture, it's start monitoring, because you just don't see the day-to-day changes when you're always out there. And 5 years from now, it might look pretty similar to you, but if I had been out there and I came back in 5 years, I might see huge changes. But when you're on top of it every day, you just kind of, it's just kind of doing its thing. So set up monitoring. We'll talk about some different simple methods for doing that. All right, so first, base your grazing on your grass, not the calendar. So many people say, oh, well, this is when I always go to this pasture, or, yeah, my animals, they're staring off into the horizon, they really want that green grass, it's time to let them go, I always let them out May 15th. Well, our climate is so variable that you can't do that, you can't use the calendar. Some years it might be earlier, but a lot of years you're gonna have to wait. And that's gonna depend to some extent on the grass species you're dealing with. So this just gives some of the ones that I passed around, but crested wheatgrass, you can graze fairly early. It's really tolerant of that. So it only has to get up to about 4 inches before you can get your first grazing. through there, and you can take it down to about 2, and you're not going to do much damage. Same with Kentucky bluegrass. 4 inches, it's okay. It's pretty happy with that. And so that might be coming up fairly soon that your bluegrass is already 4 inches, or your crested for that matter. Now orchard grass, bromms, timothy, some of our more desirable, really productive grasses, they need more time. You got to give them more time to rebuild those roots, because all winter that root system was getting smaller and smaller. The roots, they had to cleave those off because they have no capacity to rebuild during the winter, so that root system is shrinking. Now things are starting to warm up, and that plant wants to rebuild its roots so it can get down to water and nutrients. And you have to give it enough time to get enough solar panels so it can rebuild its root system, or it's in trouble, because then you start taking solar panels, it doesn't have a root system, it can't rebuild at the rate that it needs to, and then it's going to be drought stressed and nutrient stressed because it can't get to the things that it needs to. They might be 3 feet deep, and its roots are only 5 or 6 come the beginning of spring or even early summer. So think about the species and the height, and then also how much you take. This also shows you don't want to take them down much past 4 inches for the same reason. It needs enough photosynthetic capacity to rebuild that root system, because as you graze it, those roots are dying. And you need to leave enough so it can keep rebuilding and keep this whole system going.
Dan?
Yes?
What if you're in a field that has a mix of all them? Do you go for the taller one?
Right, so it's hard, right? Because you've got all these different things. You say, oh gosh, which do I manage for? You have to decide what is your desired species. What is the, probably in my, like I would look at what produces the most forage or has the potential to produce the most forage, and manage for that one. So, or the most susceptible to overgrazing, manage for that one, because then you know all the others will be okay. I pulled this from Horse Magazine just to point out one thing, that the same things you want to do to avoid founder in the spring are the same things you want to do to grow better grass. So the two go hand in hand. So keep them off that lush, fast-growing pasture until it's slowed down and starting to produce seed heads. Well, that's just like that drawing we just saw. And then the legumes isn't as related, but avoid grazing on pastures that have been exposed to bright sunny days and low temperatures. So again, spring grazing. It's not good for your animals, but it's also not good for the grass. So I don't need to read all these, but the same things that are going to make a healthier grass plant are good for your animal. All right, so rest is really critical. So when a plant is grazed, it immediately stops root growth. It starts to cleave off roots because the top is going to mirror the bottom, right? So if you take off a third of the top, you're going to lose a third of your roots. So it needs time to start rebuilding those. And if it gets hit again without that rest, then that's where you start to damage. That's what overgrazing is. It's not taking too much. It's hitting that plant multiple times when it's trying to regrow. So rest is, if there's one thing you can do, it's find a way to give those plants some rest from time to time. In the spring, so early season, you want to move fast from pasture to pasture, and you don't need as much time for regrowth. This probably isn't applicable to Montana. 10 to 14 days probably isn't going to be enough to get the regrowth that you need because our nights are so cool. Typically it's going to be 14 and up in the spring. You're going to need to get enough regrowth to get back on it. It's just too cold here. In the summer, that grass is growing slower, so you can move your animals slower, but it's going to need more rest because, again, once things get hot, our cool season grasses don't really love the daytime temperature, so they slow down during the day. They close their stowings. They don't want to lose so much water, so they have to slow down their growth. And then late summer, it just, longer rest periods. So this is kind of the idea with rest is what you're looking at. But the idea is to give that plant the opportunity to regrow its roots, regrow its solar panels, and then come back and you can get it again once it's healthy and happy. These numbers were taken from that study I showed you, those photographs. This is just a cartoon of it, but what they did is they looked at all these different levels of grazing and found, okay, when do we start to really do damage to the plant? And it's right about 50%. So at 50%, you get 2 to 4% of your root growth is stopped. You go another 10% and you lost half your roots. You go up to 70, 78, and you can see. So if you're taking 90%, a couple of grazings, the root system's stopped. It might be 2 weeks before it starts to really function again at the level it needs to. And oftentimes we've run out of water by then, so you won't see any regrowth. You say, oh, I got one grazing off this and that was it. Well, that plant is capable of regrowing. It just didn't have the roots to get any water to do it. And then we ran out of rain. So this is, again, a really something to keep in your heads. That 50% is, it's based on science. It's not my opinion. It's not, oh, you know, range cons have always been saying, yeah, if you take half, leave half. Well, there's reason for that.
Dan, is there a monitoring strategy that helps you to know when you're at half?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So again, so it comes down to residual cover. I said what's overgrazing. Overgrazing is when an individual plant gets eaten multiple times without the ability to recuperate. So what you want to do in your management is find ways that all those plants, maybe you take 50, maybe you take a little bit more, 60, I don't know. But that the plant, the individual, doesn't get eaten over and over and over, because that's what kills them. That's why those root systems shrink, is because during the growing season, they're getting hit multiple times. So by having a rotation, by thinking about rest, you're trying to prevent those multiple bites being taken from that plant. Severe grazing is when we start talking about quantity. So you're saying, what's 50%? Severe grazing is when you take 80, 90%. That has implications too. But the real harm is done when that plant gets eaten over and over and over. And you know, you guys have all seen pastures where there's knee-high grass right here, and right next to it, it's like a centimeter tall. And that same plant has been hit dozens of times that year, and it's opening opportunity for something else to come take its place because it's really unhealthy. But animals, and horses in particular, they really like that regrowth. It's really high in sugar. And so they'll keep hitting that same spot. They don't want that old rank grass because it's high in carbon. And they really like those sugars, so they'll just keep munching and munching. So you, as a land manager, have to find a way to distribute that utilization more evenly. And if you can't do that, then maybe you have to mow it. And then you'd ask about fire. Well, sometimes it's so bad that fire is a way that you can get everything on an even playing field. So those plants then are at equal palatability and nutrition, and then start a grazing system to keep them there. So I could, well, I'll get into the minor stuff in a minute. How are we doing on time?
We're at 1 o'clock,
We have till,
2 o'clock.
okay. I really want to talk about dormant season grazing. All the time I get people saying that you can't do any harm in the winter. Yeah, you can take as much as you want in the winter, the plant's dormant. And that just, it's not true. Plants are susceptible to overgrazing in the winter. We live in a really cold, windy environment, and most of the activity in that plant is at the crown. So that first, if you're coming up from the roots, the top or the bottom of the plant, that root crown, that's where a lot of the energy is stored. That's where the meristematic tissue is, so the tissue that grows new grass. If you take all the protection off of that crown in the winter, and you have cold wind blowing out here most of the winter, you kill those crowns. You reduce its ability to grow in the spring. So you can do plenty of harm in the winter. Likewise, you got to think about the soil, and the key is keeping that covered. And if you take everything off in the winter and leave that soil bare, it's cold, it's not insulated, you're going to lose soil to wind, but also those critters are going to have to go deeper and deeper to survive. And then come spring, that moisture is going to leave really, really quick. And you can see it. Go out here right now, and it's been really nice and wet, but the top 2 inches of soil in areas that are bare ground, the moisture's already gone, unless it just rained. Now go find a spot where a blue bunch plant got mashed down and dig under there, and there's still moisture. And that's what those seedlings need, or those seeds need to germinate in the spring. So you got to keep cover even in the winter. It's not harmless. And someone said to me recently they didn't think that that was the case. They're referring to elk. They said, well, they poop it all back out. And it's like, well, some of it, but all that carbon they're breaking down for energy to stay warm is gone. That's exhaled as CO2. That's the carbon that we fixed with the sun. Well, now it's going back into the air. So it's not all going back into the system. A lot of it is gone. So dormant grazing, you got to manage that too. So to do all these things, you really got to have a grazing rotation. All the concepts we just talked about, you can do with one pasture. That's fine. Some people, that's going to be their only opportunity, whether it's because of labor or space, and that's fine. But just keep those ideas in your head as you're managing that one pasture. But to do it well, in my experience, you've got to have some kind of rotation. And so that way you can allow that rest and you can better control the amount of utilization on any given spot. Because animals, they're on their own, they're going to preferentially graze one spot. They like it there for whatever reason. They like that species of plant. They like the soil. They like the sun. There's all different reasons they're going to hit that. So you have to have some way to move them, to control those animals. And then you can address all these issues if you have that set up, whether it's erosion, parasites, whether it's trying to evenly distribute that manure to get your nutrients back into the ground. You need a rotation. So here's just a simple, just kind of get the idea, but each year, starting in a different pasture, moving through in a different way. So the same grass plant isn't hit every May 15th. One year you want it to get eaten in May, maybe the next year it doesn't get eaten until August. And that plant's going to thrive as a result of it. So setting up a rotation is really the key here. Here's some different ideas for small pastures, but this applies just as well to a large pasture. These guys do it with electric fence on huge landscapes. And the idea is to be able to move those animals to get better, more even utilization, and then give that grass rest. And with a setup like these, or even something much simpler, you can do that. These would be systems where you have some level of permanent fencing to work off. Here, you got permanent, and then you've got temporary electric that you could move, depending on the grass, how fast it's growing, where you want your animals. You can also do it without any fence like that. If you just had, again, it's going to just do nice square pasture, but say your house is here, say you've got corrals here. A friend of ours, Marnie, she did rotational grazing on her hay fields where from her corrals she had a gate, and each day she would just move her electric fence in odd little patterns and move those animals around. She didn't have any permanent cross fencing, but each day she just put a little spot here, a little spot here, working off those corrals and make sure no spot ever got grazed twice. And it worked great. She could keep her horses all summer in this area to get a little bit of hay off this and then come back and graze this. And she had to install no permanent fencing, no water lines, nothing, just an electric fence charger, and then just worked around however she felt. She'd get an idea of how much they needed, chunk that out, and move around. So it could be anything as complicated or as, wood fence, electric fence, something permanent, and then temporary cross fences to move them, or just each day trying to make it work with what you have, a fence charger and a little bit of wire. So any system like that, your main considerations are going to be, again, how do you subdivide, how do you move those animals, but then also where do you put them when there's no grass, or it's too early in the season, or it hasn't had enough rest, and then how do you water them and still do this? And that can be difficult, is making sure that they can get good clean water, but not overuse that area where the water is. And so a lot of people will build some sort of alleyway. And so you pick an area that you kind of know is going to get used a little bit harder than you'd like, build an alleyway to get back to water, and then you work off of that alleyway with temporary fence. And so you can block it out, but you always have that one route back to the water tank so they can get a good drink when they need it. Depending on what type of grazer, they don't have to be out there all day. A lot of animals only need maybe 3-4 hours a day to get their nutritional requirements, but they'll continue to eat as long as they're given the opportunity because it tastes good and they're bored and they're just going to hang out and eat. So you can really extend the life of each of these paddocks if you only use it for a few hours and then kick them back into the corral. Again, it's a labor thing. A lot of people have to go to work or they have other responsibilities. It's hard to be constantly moving animals, but if your goal is to really improve your pasture, those are the sorts of things you have to do. You have to think about. But they don't need all day to be healthy and to get their feed requirements. It's only a matter of hours. So where they end up in some sort of dry lot. And then there's considerations there too. You don't want to create other resource issues by confining animals. So you need to think about your footing, something that drains well. Again, having shelter for them. How big does it need to be? A lot of people, they don't want to see their animals confined too tightly. They're their friends in a lot of cases, and they're concerned about them being crowded. But a lot of, in the case of horses anyway, a lot of horse vets and experts would say they need about 400 square feet per animal. So that's not very much to be healthy and happy. But you have to have good footing and good drainage, so and you have to clean it so there aren't issues with disease or parasites. Along with developing the system, if you have any surface water, that needs to be taken into major consideration. A lot of times you'll see live water in corrals or adjacent to corrals, and that has implications for your neighbors and for the entire community. So think about things like water gaps. So there's limited access to that surface water, both so nutrients and sediment don't get in there. If you have, say, like that picture of my friend's barn back there, you have to think about runoff issues. If the slope of the land is this way and you have a roof right here, oftentimes that tends to direct water right into your dry or your corral, and then that can create surface water problems. So think about gutters, French drains, different kinds of diversions. A lot of these things are pretty simple to do, and they're going to improve your animal health, but also surface water quality for everybody else. Vegetation is probably the best way. If you can have good vegetative buffers between animals and surface water, well then you're going to filter out most of those nutrients. Allow that water to go in the ground where you can reuse it rather than down the river. Stock tanks, again, is a really good way. Traditionally, you've always had access to surface water. In a lot of cases, the stock tank is pretty easy, and the animals will do better on it. I see it all the time with large cattle operations. They move to stock tanks from surface water, and they come back and tell me, I didn't believe you, Dan, but sure enough, the cattle are doing better. And we didn't even have to put in fence because they would choose to use that tank over the surface water, and they're doing great. So a lot of people found that that's been very beneficial, both economically but also for water quality issues. All right, so you've got your pasture set up one way or another, and I know, again, that was quick. Everybody's going to be different, though, so I don't want to get too specific on how you lay it out. But those are the considerations. Then you have to figure out how much is available in the system. So if I have one pasture or I have 6 paddocks, how much is there? What do I do? How much do I need? And so we call that the feed-forage balance. And this is sitting down at a kitchen table and doing some math and figuring out, what have I got to work with and how much do I have to buy? Because that's going to be your other options. How much hay are you going to have to feed to maintain a healthy pasture? So I'm going to go through the math really quickly, how I do it, and then we're going to do an actual example based off soil survey data. So I'll just kind of show you how you would do it, and then we'll do one, because I know I need to go through it to actually, for it to make sense. So first thing you want to do is see how much is there. How much do you have to work with? And so this would be your forage availability. And there's a couple of sources you can start with. The first would be the soil survey. And we're going to go through it on the internet, but I still use my paper copy a lot because the internet can be slow. And this is an awesome resource. Every soil in the county is in here with a really good description. It tells you how much it should produce, what species live there, if it's good for sprinkler irrigation, if it's good for fencing, if it's good for building septic systems. So everything about the soil is in this book. Now with technology, it's all online, we can access it, but this is a great thing to fall back on, and I have tons of copies of these if anybody wants them because they're kind of obsolete. But you can start there. You can go to the soil survey and say, what is this soil capable of producing? And those numbers are gathered by guys like me going out and clipping representative sites and compiling all that data. And they did this years and years ago. But they looked at all these soils based on aspect and based on precip zone, so are they higher up or lower down, and what should it produce? And you can get that number, and then you can go through these calculations and say, okay, roughly what might I have in my pasture? So you take the total forage off that soil survey, total forage per acre, and you do that times 0.25, which people, they always question, 0.25, that's not very much. But remember, we want to take half, leave half. And no animal out there is efficient enough to only eat half without wasting any or crapping on any or trampling any. So 0.25 is what's actually going to make it in your animal's belly. And so that's where the calculations for AUMs comes from. It's that 0.25. So you take your total, my field produces 1,000 pounds, and we take 25% of that, so I have 250 pounds of air-dry feed to work with. So in AUM, that's in pounds, but I usually work in AUMs, and that's what you're going to see a lot of people do, particularly more on the livestock side of things, or production livestock, is AUMs. you would do that and you would divide by 915. And 915 pounds is the old standard of how much feed a 1,000-pound cow and calf needs. So it's based off 2 to 3% of her body weight per day. And you come up with this 915. So if you take your total, say it was, like I said, 250 pounds is what you have available. You divide it by 915, you're going to come up with roughly, what's that, like 0.2 something AUMs per acre. Now, we'll go through this again, so don't worry, we'll go back through it. But that's using the soil survey. You could do the same thing by clipping and weighing. And this is what I do. If you were to call me out and say, gosh, Dan, I want to develop a rotation, I have no idea what I have, I'd come out and I would clip it. I would wait till growth had pretty much stopped around 4th of July or middle of July. I'd take this hoop, which is 4.8 square feet. I would clip all the grass, everything palatable in there. I'd put it in a paper bag, and then I'd weigh it with a little scale. And because this is 4.8 square feet, and that's a gram scale, it's a really easy conversion. You just multiply by 20, and it gives you pounds per acre. So if I clip 40 grams of grass, I do it times 20, I come up with 800 pounds per acre production. Then go through this same equation. I take that 800 pounds, a quarter of it is available to actually put in a horse or cow's mouth, and I'd figure out that's what you have to work with for the year. So it's really pretty simple. Another way, if you're dealing with irrigated pasture, which some of you probably are, is to use a pasture stick. And this is, you just get an idea of height, and then if you have a general idea, is my pasture in good shape, poor shape, this has conversions on there of inches of height, how many pounds of feed that's going to be. So if I go here, this is going to say on a cool season, introduced pasture, in good condition, and you have more than 4 inches. So every inch above 4 inches is about 175 to 250 pounds of feed. So you'll have to look at this. I'll pass this around so you kind of see all the information on this. But this is a great tool. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of these right now, but I can get more if people want them. This one's Melissa's. She gets it for helping us with this today. But take a look at that, and I can get more. But that's another way to do it. And then there's also estimates from the universities. So MSU has some really general. They've got charts that say cool season natives, this precip zone, this many AUMs are available. Or it'll say introduced, or it'll say crop aftermath. And they've got charts that have that with real rough guidelines. They usually correspond very well with soil survey. Usually our clipping comes out a little bit less than what those recommendations say, because they're based on the potential of that site, which doesn't account for management and all the other things that go into it. But these are great kind of broad general starting places, then clipping and weighing is how you really get to it and know what you have to work with. But either way, regardless, you would run through this equation to figure pounds available or AUMs, whichever you're more comfortable working with. So this is where that AUM calculation comes from, 3% of body weight. That's really variable depending on the size of the animal, the stage of maturity, or if they're a pregnant animal, they're going to use more or less depending on where they are in the cycle. But essentially what you come up with is 1,000 pound, about 30 pounds a day is what they need, 950 pounds a month, that equals an AUM. So that's one cow or a calf, 1,000-pound cow. No one really has 1,000-pound cows anymore. They typically range from 1,200 and up. But once upon a time when range science was just getting started, that's what people had was 1,000-pound cows, and so that's what this is based on. They're much bigger now, 1,600, 1,800 pounds. So you have to adjust accordingly. You can't still use 1 AM if your animal weighs 1,600 pounds. So there's animal unit equivalents that you can use to adjust this 950 pounds. So a horse is an inefficient grazer. So even if it's smaller, it still requires more to get its nutritional requirements. So a horse is 1.25 animal unit equivalents. So you have to take this and do it times that to figure out what a horse would need. And this, again, this is your average horse, whatever that is. But they are less efficient. They need more than a cow does because they're not ruminants. They can't get all the nutrients out of that the way that a cow would. Sheep are about 1/5 of an AUM. So 5 sheep is the same as that 1,000-pound cow. An elk is about 2/3. So when you look on the bench and there's, 4,000 elk, and you start to do the math on, okay, so that's equivalent to quite a few cattle out there for the whole winter. Or at Aaron's place, he's feeding a lot of elk. That's a lot of AUMs. And if you got gopher problems, it's 0.003 gophers. So if you start to count your gophers and then convert that, when you're doing your feed forage balance, you have to know, oh, the gopher's only going to leave this much for my sheep or my cows or whatever you got. Yes, ma'am.
Do you happen to know what a horse eats pounds per month?
Well, again, you're going to take its body weight. And a horse could be 2.5% to maybe 3, a little over 3, depending on their maturity level and the time of year. So you would figure out what your horse weighed, multiply it by that, and that's how you would come up with that figure. It's going to vary a little bit, but in general, it's a good starting point. But typically, when I'm doing a feed forage balance on a big place, they got a lot of horses, a lot of cattle. This is what we use as our conversion, just because typically that's what research has shown, is that's how much they're going to be using. Figure out what's out there, and then figure out how much your animals need. So figure out per animal, multiply it by the number of animals you have, and then by 12 months, because then you got to feed them year round. And that's where you start to come up with that balance. So go back to that. So then this is where you start to go and look at your pastures and say, well, this paddock's an acre. So it produces X number of pounds. Therefore, I have this many days to graze it. And that's how you build your grazing rotation, is with math. You don't just start right there and figure out, this is roughly what I have. And then, as the growing season progresses, you got to go out there and say, how is this working? Maybe you're leaving a lot. Maybe you say, well, gosh, I could have been in there for 3 more days. Or maybe you say, whoa, I didn't want to see that much buried ground. I got to move a little faster. But this is your starting point. Start with the math so you have some idea, so you feel comfortable kind of getting the ball rolling. And then you're going to have to tweak it each year. And it's going to vary with rain and temperature patterns and everything else. But this is where you got to start. Get some idea of what's out there. As you progress through that, once you've got to start, that's where we come to the monitoring. This is what Sonny was asking about. We kind of touched on. Monitoring is really, really important. You need to know if things are going uphill or downhill. You need to know so you can make changes in your management and know whether you're reaching your objectives, whether it's pounds per acre, or whether it's less knapweed, or whether it's more blue bunch. You got to have some way of measuring that. And there's a lot of ways to do it. And it's going to depend kind of on your goals. If you just want to look at trends and you want your property to look a certain way, you want to see less bare ground, you want to see taller bunch grasses, simple photo plots can be really helpful. So put a stake in the ground, GPS it, whatever you're comfortable with, and go there every year at the same time to take pictures both of the landscape and also of the ground. And when I'm setting up photo monitoring, I'll do it along a transect, so I get a pretty good representative sample. So maybe every 20 feet. Maybe every 10 feet if you've got a small area and you're really concerned about issues. But go along that tape, and I'll show you. Just run a 100-foot tape between stakes. Run that tape out, and then along a predetermined distance, whether it's 10 feet, 50 feet, take that picture of the ground cover. And then when you come back the next year, you can go to that exact same spot, and you can see, is there more cactus? Is there more cheatgrass? Or holy moly, that blue bunch last year was like this, and now it's like this. And you'll have a record of that if you do this photo monitoring. And it's really simple. Grazing cages are a really good one. They're really useful. I like them just because it's a quick visual. You can do it from the truck. So if you've got larger pastures or you don't have a lot of time, just take some old wire panel. You could even do it with sheep fence, woven wire fence if you didn't have any of that heavier gauge panel. Put it between some T-posts in your paddock or your pasture, whatever you're working with, and exclude grazing from it. And then you can drive by and say, oh boy, they've used 50%, they've used 60%. You get your eye, you'll have to adjust to it. But it's a real good visual, because sometimes they'll go out there and say, oh, I don't think they've used very much. But if you've got that grazing cage as a comparison, you might say, holy moly, they've used a lot. Or vice versa, you might say, oh, they barely touched it. They can stay quite a bit longer, because you've got that cage as a reference. So you know what those plants are capable of now. You know where they would be at without grazing, and then you can use that to decide when to hit the road or to stay a little bit longer. Clipping, again, you can use clipping as a monitoring tool. If you're not comfortable eyeballing it, you could go out before your animals go into a pasture, you can throw the hoop, you can clip, you can weigh, and say I've got, I don't know, 1,000 pounds. And then after they've been in there a little while and you start to wonder if it's time to move, throw that hoop again, clip it and see what's left. If there's only 100 pounds left, then, oh yeah, probably time to move. You've used a little bit more than 50%. But if it's only 10% or 20%, and eventually your eye's going to get trained to it by doing that, that you won't need to have a grazing cage or a hoop, because you're going to know, yeah, that's about 50%. This is when I want to get going. Grazing stick, same thing. You can use that to look at height. So you start off, oh, I've got 8 inches. You come back and you've got 4. Yeah, you could probably stay a little bit longer. Figure a plant, a grass plant, there's more biomass in the base of it than there is in the top, right? It's not an even cylinder of biomass. So when I say take half, it's not necessarily half the height, it's half the biomass, half the weight that's out there. And so a lot of that weight's going to be in the lower 2/3. So you can go more than 50% height and probably still be in pretty good shape. But you don't want to go too far beyond that. And so even a yardstick will work. You don't need a grazing stick, but it's got a lot of info on it. Yes?
When you clip or whatever, how far do you go? Do you go right to the ground or?
There's different ways to do it. So I clip right to the ground so I know total biomass, and then I do the math. But some people will clip at the desired height. So say they're like, I'd like to see this pasture maybe 3 or 4 inches. So they'll clip at that level, and that tells them exactly how much they can take. And then they know, yeah, I've got X number of animals, so I got about this many days to remove that much biomass. So it's kind of the same, but it's just whatever you're more comfortable doing. Cover transects, again, with that tape. If you lay a tape out to do pictures, you can also take a pin of some sort. One of these, or just straighten out a coat hanger or a little flag, those little pink flags or orange flags, and go along, and what you do is at given distances, so a foot or every 2 feet, you drop that pin and see what you hit. If you hit grass or you hit litter, 90% of the time, well great, you've got really good cover. But if you hit bare ground 50% of the time, well then we know we're way outside of the expected limits for those soil, and that's a bad deal. So this is a good way if you don't like the amount of bare ground you have. The cover transect is a really good way to quantify that and see change maybe over 5 years. If you keep doing this and you say, oh, I'm down to 14% and then 10%, like awesome, you're covering that ground with organic matter. And this is a way that if the photos don't show it, then a line transect is a good way to put actual numbers to it. Likewise with utilization, a lot of what I do when I'm working with landowners on grazing plans is to monitor utilization. There's a step transect method, and so it's kind of low labor. You just put a little notch in the toe of your boot or get comfortable with a little spot in the toe of your boot, and every pace find the closest desirable plant. So I'll usually do it, like if I was in range, I'd probably do it for blue bunch and maybe Idaho fescue, if that's what the plant community was. And so take 100 steps, and every time I'll find the closest plant and I'll estimate, has it been used 50%, has it been used 10%, and then at the end you can multiply those percentages, and it sounds kind of, you'd have to see it, but basically you just multiply those by the number of steps and it gives you a percent utilization. And if anyone wants to ever do that method, I can show it to you, but I can also give you the form, which makes it really, really easy. But all you're doing is you're walking along, you're saying, oh, yeah, it's about half, make a check mark, oh, 10%, oh, that one's 80%, and at the end you can just compile those numbers and it'll give you a picture of the pasture, because anybody with animals knows that they don't march along and eat every plant at a certain percentage. Some of them are going to be right to the ground, and some of them they just took the seed heads off. And so what we want to do is make sure we're looking at the whole pasture, not an individual plant saying, oh, this is way overgrazed or undergrazed, but getting a good overall picture, because animals just don't use things perfectly. That's just the nature of it. If you watch a cow eat, sometimes she'll walk up to a bunch grass and she'll reach her tongue around, and so half that plant's munched right down low, but half that plant's still perfectly healthy and it's got seed heads and tons of solar panels. So you want to try to account for that, and that's the step transect, where you kind of estimate how much was taken on multiple plants. 100 plants will give you a good picture of the overall pasture, not just one spot or whatever. Okay, perfect. I think other considerations, so these are other topics that are huge and that I didn't want to try to get into, but I would love to talk to anybody else questions at the end or wants to call me, but irrigation water management is a huge part of all this. Your plant production on irrigated pasture hayfield is really closely related to how much water you put on, enough or too much. And so there's ways to look at what your soil can hold and then what your plant needs to try to balance those. Same as we would a feed forage balance. We know, certain soil holds 3 inches of water. That's it. That's just the case, And so that's what you have to work with. If you put more than that on, you're leaching all your nitrogen out. So it's no longer available for your plant. So irrigation water management is looking at your soil, see how much water can I fit in there before I start to lose nutrients. And then how do I make sure I keep enough in there to keep, say, alfalfa alive? Because it has certain requirements, and we know what those are. So again, it's using math to try to come up with a plan, and then you got to tweak it on the ground as you see differences in soils or response. Nutrient management, same idea, looking at fertilizers, manure. That goes for both making sure your plant has enough, but also making sure you don't put too much on and then cause problems for those plants. A lot of times on small pastures we see too much manure being spread, and so the salt numbers are way up. And salts make life pretty hard on grass plants. And so you could definitely do too good a job of spreading manure and then end up with problems down the road for those plants. So nutrient management, again, is trying to balance those things. Taking soil samples and then looking at plant requirements and what's in your manure or in your fertilizer application and trying to get that in some sort of balance so you don't overdo it or underdo it, and then your production suffers as a result. Wildlife is a big issue around here. I get lots of calls about wildlife. Either people, they want more, they bought a property here and they bought it for wildlife, and they say, how can I get more critters? I want to shoot them, or I want to take pictures of them, or whatever. And then there's the other side. People say, I need to get rid of these things. They're eating all my hay, they're destroying my pasture. What can we do to kind of relieve some of these wildlife issues? So that, again, that's a whole topic in itself, but I just wanted to say these are other things that have to come into the equation. So that pasture doesn't exist in isolation. There's all these other things that we could address, or other people out there can help you address if you want more information. Available water or holding capacity. So your soil, think of it as a cylinder, and there's a certain number of inches of water that can go and that it can hold before it starts to drip out. And so soils in this county range anywhere from like a little in the top 5 feet, which would be your management zone for, say, alfalfa, 3 feet for grasses. Some of our soils can hold only about 2 or 3 inches in that whole profile, and therefore when a grass plant's using 1/3 of an inch a day, it goes through that pretty quick. Other soils can hold 7, 8, 10 inches, and then those you have a lot more flexibility as far as when do you need to be back with your sprinkler or your flood irrigation there. So, and that's all available in that soil survey, and it'll be available on the website. Those are all kind of the foundations and then the principles that we're thinking about. But it's a lot of info. So what I want to do is kind of go through a practice one, say, how do we figure these, the production available, how do we figure what our horses need or our cattle need, and then maybe lay out a little bit of pasture rotation. So that was my idea, and Melissa was really, really awesome and said, okay, you can use my place as an example. So we're going to look at her soils, her production, then her animals, and try to kind of get some ideas, and she's already doing a really good job. So typically when I start working with people, they just have a blank slate. They say, well, this is what I got, what do I do? But Melissa's already done a really good job, so we're like halfway there, or probably more than halfway there. She's got the fence, she's got water, she's already rotating, so it's really cool. But I'll probably have her tell you a little bit about what she's doing when we get there. First though, we'll go through some numbers, and I'll show you where to get a lot of information about your ground, so you can do the same thing at home, or I can help you. So first of all, what species, what plants do you have? How much production do you have to work with? How much do you need? How could you rotate through that to use that most efficiently? Do you have a contingency plan if you have a fire, or we get a terrible drought, or the elk show up and clean you out overnight? And then how are you going to monitor this to know what's happening? Is it getting better or worse? Okay, so here's Melissa's place. So here's the map. This is the Madison Valley. Here's Ennis Lake. And Melissa's up here. What's the name of the road, Melissa?
Airport Road.
Airport Road. So here's the airport right here. and she's off Airport Road. So you guys are familiar with that area. It's native bunch grasses. That's been native bunch grasses for thousands of years. It's blue bunch, it's all sorts of great grass up there. Large areas up here have also been seeded into crested wheat, so you'll see a lot of crested wheat up there. But that's typically, in this part of the world, what you're going to be dealing with is native grasses or crested, which behave very similar to our native bunch grasses in a lot of respects. Not a lot of irrigation up there, really droughty soils. Pretty tough place to make a living for a grass plant. Okay, so this is where we're going to start, and this is the soil survey. This is a website that's available to everybody. It's called the Web Soil Survey. Let me get it running, and then I'll talk to you while it's loading. I'll talk a little bit about it. Okay, so basically the Web Soil Survey is all of the NRCS soil data for the whole country in this giant database. And it used to be very difficult to access it, and it was in formats that were really hard for the average person to find what they wanted. So what they've done is try to make it really user-friendly, so both professionals and then also any landowner can get on here and get the information they need relatively quickly and in a format that's easy to understand. So it's available for the whole country. You're going to click, well, you saw the website, and I can write that down if anybody needs it. But if you Google Web Soil Survey, it's the only thing you're going to get. Hit the big green button right in the middle, and you're going to come here. The first thing you want to do, and if you're writing notes, the first thing is your area of interest, and it's going to bring you here to this tab first of all. You need to establish your area of interest. That's your property. It might be a 10,000 acre ranch, it might be 5 acres, but that's your area, that's what you want to gather the data for. So you start here. You can get there by typing in your address, you can go by state or county, if you know the soil survey area, your lat long, there's all different ways to get to your area. Or you can just go on the map and just zoom in. And so if I take we get to Madison County, and then we kind of know where we're headed, right? We're going up there, so we'll just zoom into, if I can find it. Tell me if I'm way off. Did I get it, Melissa? Not bad, we're getting there. So you can go quicker if you just type in your address, but it's kind of neat to see, you know, if you don't, this is, you can get there eventually. I guess I do it the slow way. Sometimes the address isn't going to pop. Okay, so if you guys recall the map I showed you of Melissa's place, this is her right here. So you find where you're going, and then at the top of this page right here, you're going to see this button right here, AOI, your area of interest. And that's the button you use to set your actual boundaries on your area of interest. So you click that, and then you're going to surround it. I usually give a pretty good buffer around the actual property I'm working on because I want to see what else is out there. Is there a lot of variability, or is it just one soil unit that encompasses the whole area? So I'll just drag it, select that whole area around your property, and now it's doing its thing. It's creating its area of interest. So it's now going to the database, and it's getting all the information it knows about that particular spot. So it takes a second for it to do that. Okay, so there's your area. This is the property we're looking at. So now you're ready to start getting your information. You've established that. We'll start real quick. Whoa, shoot, what did I just do? I don't want a new area of interest. Yeah, it did. Hold on. I'm going to try, I want it a little bigger than that, just to get these surrounding soils here. Okay. It's pretty close. Nope, not at all. Okay, so, yeah, I got it there. All right, so now we'll go to a soil map. Just start real simple. And this is the same thing, if you dug through that book, eventually you'd find your property, You find a soil map for your part of the county and you can find the soils. So here you go. We got two different soil types that are either on or adjacent to this property. We got 139 and we got 50. If you come over here, it's going to tell you what they are. So 50 is a Hanson Channery loam. 139 is a Trimad Cobley loam. Okay, so that doesn't mean much to most people, but those are two different soils. To get a description of those soils, all you got to do is click on it. And so most of that property is 50, is this Hanson. So we're going to click on that one. And there you go. This is a mapping description. So it's going to give you your approximate elevation. So that soil can be found anywhere from 4,800 to 8,800 feet. It's not saying that property, but it's saying this soil, that's where it lives, is that elevation. Mean precip is going to be 18 to 26. So that is right on the upper edge where we go from a 10 to 15 or 16 precip zone up into a higher one. So it's right where things start to get steeper. And you can see it this time of year where you'll get snow along that band. Well, that's that change in precip zone, and you're right on that. So the lower end of your property, according to this map, is in a lower precip zone. In reality, it's a gradient. We're somewhere in between. But it gives you an idea. Frost-free days gives you the setting. It's moraine hill. It's coming off the mountains there. Your parent material is going to be alluvium coming out of limestone. So there's a lot of limestone in the Madison Range. So that has implications for cropping. It has implications for the types of plants that are there because there is that limestone. So I won't go into too much detail here, but I want you to see that. That's where you start to get an idea about the soil. What is it made of? Where did it come from? Then we'll get into more specifics about management. So
Dan, can I just ask you really quick?
yes.
After you set your area of interest, then how did you get it to pull up the soil?
I hit this one right here, soils map. So we started area interest, then I went to soil map. We're now going to go to Soil Data Explorer, which is that next tab over. And that's the guts of it. That's where all the information's stored. So go into the Explorer, and you've got all these different options. Again, a whole new set of tabs. So it's a lot of information. It can be overwhelming figuring out which tab do I need to go to. But when you mess around a little bit, you'll get pretty familiar with it. It's not too bad. So here's your suitabilities and limitations. So if you're looking at building, if you're looking at military operations, whatever you might be doing, you can get information about anything you want about that soil in relation to these things. So we're talking about vegetative productivity, we're talking about range, and you can find that a couple places. We're gonna go down to soil reports to get that one. So let's go to soil reports, and you see if I scroll down here, we got vegetative productivity. So let's open that, and there's a lot of different options because this software is set up for all different types of land uses. It doesn't know we're in rangeland right now. So it's saying, okay, well, if it's forest, we can tell you about that. If it's irrigated, we can tell you about that. What we're looking at is rangeland, right? This is native range. So we're going to go down there, and we're going to click this one. If you just wanted productivity, you can go to the bottom one, but I like to get a little more information about the plants. So you go to this and click that. This comes up. And it's going to say, do you want to view the description or do you want a soil report? Well, we want the report. The description just tells you what's included in that report. So we'll click, and now it's going to that database. Say, okay, we're in rangeland. We need to know a little bit more about it. Okay, so now here you go. This is your report, and I'm going to scroll down so you can see that. You can also put any information you go grab out of this. You can put into your shopping cart. Like if you were on Amazon and you were buying a bunch of stuff, you can do the same thing with this information, is put all these reports into a shopping cart and essentially build your own little soil survey for your place of just the information you want, and then just print it out. So, operate this.
I'll add one more thing too. You guys see that we got a camera going over there. This whole workshop is being recorded and it'll be put on YouTube. So I realize we're clicking through a lot of different tabs and a lot of different areas. We'll have something we can reference back to.
Yeah, and you can always call me if you're like, oh gosh, I'm looking at soil reports and I don't know where to, I can just walk you through it. But so this is what you'll get. Here, remember, here's our two soils, our Hanson and our Trimad. And if you remember the map, which you can't see it all on the screen, it's too small, but our map is still there, so you can reference back. On your computer, you'll be able to see both of them. Most of that property was this 50, right? And so this is going to now tell you, okay, for that in its potential state, so in really good condition, that soil on a normal year could produce as much as 2,200 pounds of dry matter, so overall plant biomass. And it's going to be made up of these species. Now, on this one, we don't really have any rough fescue left. You'd be hard pressed to find any rough fescue in the entire valley. I've never seen it here. The closest I've been able to find a rough fescue plant was up north of Whitehall. So, almost across the board, these are really accurate. If you see rough fescue, you're going to have to replace it with probably mostly blue bunch and then Idaho fescue. So what I would do is I would say, I'm going to take this 35% and split it between blue bunch and Idaho, because that's what's really there. We just don't have rough fescue. But that tells you, okay, those are my species. That's what I expect to be out there. That's what I want to be out there. Now, if you know it's mostly knapweed and cheatgrass, well, you know you're not getting 2,200 pounds. But this gives you a starting point, and this gives you something to shoot for. You know, that soil can produce that. It can produce 2,200 pounds. Well, geez, there's irrigated fields around here that aren't producing that. So that gives you something to strive for. Are you ever probably going to get to like this 28? Man, probably not. But you know things can be pretty darn good, and you can have a lot of blue bunch and Idaho fescue because the soil characteristics are there, the precip's there, everything's there for those to live on that site. You look at this other one, we've now gone down precip. See how I said that 10 to 15? Well, they call it 9 to 14 as you come down that slope. And so your production goes way down. You've got similar species, you've got blue bunch in there, and it's a sizable portion, 65. But because there's less moisture, it's a little drier site, and then also because of the soil texture, your production goes down. And so you can go through and use this tool to look at all kinds of different spots, look at your property, and then start to kind of get these ballparks. And then you take that back and you do the equations to figure out what's available. And so I can do that on our board real quick. Sonny, do you have a calculator? It's hard to do math when I'm on the spot.
Dana, got one if you want to use reverse Polish notation.
What's that?
An HB 12C.
Yeah, that is calculator. Yeah, I can hopefully figure it out. On button.
It just works in reverse Polish notation where you put over 5 times.
Oh, okay.
Here, do you want
Sorry.
Well, I can figure it out. All right. All right, so let's take this Hanson Channery loam, assuming that that's the state. Assuming that, okay, we've got mostly blue bunch Idaho fescue on that site. Walked around or took out a grass ID book. Yeah, this is what we've got roughly. Okay, let's take that 2,200 pounds. So you got 2,200 pounds total production. This is your total biomass out there. If this list here showed that 50% of this was sagebrush, I wouldn't use this as calculating my forage because your animals probably aren't going to eat that sagebrush. But here, we've got mostly grasses, so we're going to just say, for the sake of this experiment or this example here, we're going to use that 2,200 pound. But you need to look at that. You get down here even, there's other shrubs, well, what's that? And they're a small percentage, but they're there. And so you wouldn't include those in your calculations because you're not going to be using them as forage. So 2,200. And then what did we decide? What's our forage efficiency? What's the value we use as far as how much is available? 0.25, right? So we'll do 0.25. So I can probably do that in my head. I should be able to. So is that 550?
Yeah.
So you have 550 pounds of available. Okay? Per acre. So that's per acre. And then do you guys want to use AUMs or you want to leave it in pounds? I always use AUMs, but maybe it's easier for folks to do in pounds if they're not using them. All right, we'll leave it in pounds then. No one's saying anything. So we got 550 pounds available feed out there per acre. Okay? Now, is there a way to... I don't want to lose any of this, but I want to look at Melissa's map. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what Melissa's got already. So this is that property we looked at, and then she overlaid her fencing and her home on there. So you can kind of see what she's got to work with. So she's got a great dry lot corral area here, convenient, you got shelter, you got water, a place to put those animals when you need to rest the grass. where they're safe. Couple of smaller pastures here that are already set up, and then this larger pasture that you can use hot wire to rotate through. So let's just pick one of these and say how many days of grazing are in there. So we'll take winter pasture number 1, and I measured it on ArcMap. It's about 1.5 acres. So if I can turn this back on. How do I get back to the? Oh, there we go.
Slide a window.
Okay, so we got 550 pounds per acre, right? We're going to do that times 1.5 acres. We come up with, in that paddock, 825 pounds of available forage, okay, in that field. Now, Melissa, at any given time, or how many animals would be using that?
I have 3 horses.
3 horses, okay. And we'll just use a standard 1.2 AUMs for those horses. They might be larger or smaller, but. So assuming you got 3, we're going to say, right, the conversion factor is 1.25, and that animal needs, or an AUM is what, 915 pounds, right? So we'll do 915 times that 1.25. And so those horses each need about 1,140 pounds a month. Okay? And so we do that, and we got 3 of them. Right? So that's 3, 4, 3, 1. So 3,431 pounds of feed a month for those 3 horses. That's dry matter. That's forage. Okay? So then we take what's in that pasture. We go back, right? We decided there was 825 pounds of feed that was in that little paddock, right? So we'll take our total, divided by what we have, or I'm sorry, we'll take our what we have divided by what we need. So your total over your needed, 825 divided by 3, 4, 3, 1, and we got 0.24. Okay? 0.24, and remember, we're going off months. That 950 pounds was over the course of a month what those animals need. So we have a quarter of a month worth of grazing in that paddock. So if you want to do that times a month, I use 30.5 days just to account for some 30s, some 31s. 7.3. So you got about 7 days worth of grazing in that paddock for the year. That's how much that can produce based off our soil survey estimate of 2,200 pounds. So then you decide, how do I use that? Do I want to use it just in 7 days? Just put them in there for 7 days and walk away? Or use it a few hours a day and spread that out? If you came through it quick and fast, rotated through like we were talking about, and then gave it rest and we got enough moisture, you might be able to come back through. So this is a starting point, but it gives you an idea if you're looking at a pasture saying, well, do I have a month in there, or do I have 2 days in there? This is where you would start to get an idea, and then you're going to have to tweak it based on all those other things that we talked about, as far as the grass, the height of the grass, and the timing, and all those sorts of things. Any questions? Yes, Dustin. What is
So you're basing that on hours then? So I mean, if you've got what do you say, 7 days worth? So if you're just letting them out there for 3 hours, you can go up to 24 hours even for a day.
It's not going to be direct push because they are getting a lot of their feed in that few hours. They're going to feed really heavily if they're only in there for a few hours. They're going to get what they need, and then you're going to pull them out. So it will extend it, but it's not going to be a 24 to 1 back and forth. You'll extend it, but not to that extent. You'll have to monitor, but it will definitely draw it out a lot more if you're able to do that. That said, you've got to have some kind of rotation if you're doing that, because if you are only giving 2 hours, then pull them out in 2 hours, which plant do you think they're going to keep going back to? The same one, right? So if it's a small period of time, you have to have things subdivided, or you have to be managing them in some way so you're not getting that repeated grazing on that same poor little plant over and over and over again. And so that's where this becomes more of an art than a science. So you can start with the math, that's the science part, and get a good idea of what you can do or what your parameters are, but then it becomes an art, is how do you get those animals to do what you want them to do. And you guys know that, I'm sure, all too well. They're trying to get them to behave the way they're supposed to, according to range management. You know, it doesn't always happen. But it gives you a place to start. And then you gotta watch them, and then in a lot of cases with small numbers of animals, you gotta keep shrinking those packs because just the physical control, so they're not allowed to eat that same plant, but also then the competition between each other encourages them to be a little bit more adventurous and use things a little bit more evenly. Whereas if you got all the room in the world and no one's, feeding right next to you and pushing on you, you're just gonna say, oh, I want that, and I want that, and I want that. But if you see all your buddies coming, you're like, oh, I'm gonna eat all these because I don't want you to get them. And that's where you start to make sure you maintain that diversity and you're not picking and choosing and taking one plant out of the community. Melissa, you want to tell us a little bit about how this has worked and what you've been doing? And
Well, I'm going into year 2 of this, so I am excited to have a monitoring plan now, to have something to start from. But as far as the other area that's not the pasture, I'll take a certain area and use electrical fencing and have them out during the summertime if it's hot, just all night, and then bring them into the sacrificial area during the daytime. I guess over the course of a period while they're in that electrical fence area, last year at least, I was pretty strict. I made them eat it way down, and it's probably severe grazing that you mentioned, before I moved them to another area. And I didn't, it was definitely by time frame of how much they ate it down and what they explored as different plants in that area for when I moved them to the next area. What else? I don't have a whole lot of noxious weeds on my property, but I did find that if I knock down certain weeds, I go around with the weed whacker and knock them down, the horses will, once they're kind of wilted, they will eat them, and I'm anxious to see this year what comes back. It's kind of neat to know that they are eating them, but maybe they're going to be less and less each year as years go on. What else?
does anybody have questions for Melissa about what she's doing? She's got the experience in this place. She's actually making it happen, so she's probably better answering these questions than I can.
I do have questions about what your thoughts on the areas where I have, I think you called it rock soil, or the rock moss?
Oh, the club moss.
Yes.
Yeah.
What, how do I go about, do you think just over time the grasses are going to start growing in those areas?
We've got a couple of club moss experts right here.
Oh, yeah?
Luke, Lloyd, do you guys want to talk about what you've been doing to try to address that? Because I think that we would agree that it's not going to probably go away on its own. It's really tough because, like we were talking about, the grass, to recolonize those sites, there's no open ground. There's no open place for a seed to germinate. So on its own, it's probably not going to change. These guys have been working really hard to try to fix it, though. So you guys want to talk a little bit about what you're doing?
What we've done is, we're working with cattle, is what takes care of club moss is ripping it loose from the soil. So if you've got I realize you don't have a bunch of cattle, but if you can get that soil disturbed without ripping the grass out, get some cover over it, make litter, and feed the grass, then we're better off. What we have done is, when we fed our cows, instead of going out there and feeding in a line, we drop the bale off and cut the strings. And we feed enough feed for that day for the cattle. What the cattle do is they mill around that area, push on the bale, push on each other, poop and shit in that area. They waste a little bit of hay, and tear that club moss up like it was a cheap carpet.
Wow.
This is, we're just 1 or 2 years into it. We don't know what we've got to accomplish. We may be doing really bad things, but within 4 months, the area that we started on the grass that was there, when it came up, actually had a root system, had a crown, and it was blue bunch.
There was all sorts of things, a lot of western and blue bunch and
Yeah. it
that,
was-
the
it
blue bunch, that was
bunch
beautiful.
grass. It was bunch grasses that before were just little threads sticking up through this carpet of club moss. When we took club moss out of there, even before the litter had a chance to decompose and go through its whole cycle, it looked, from the top anyway, like the grasses itself had been invigorated. So you could do the same with your horses on your winter pasture. Rather than being nice to them and putting this little piece of hay here and that little piece of hay there. Feed them one bale in one spot and then just move to another spot. And that's what we did with our cows. We didn't feed day after day on one spot. We just moved. And we went through, there's probably 60 acres of that pasture that we fed roughly 200 cows on. So you gotta abuse it a little bit and then you gotta give it rest.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're doing a great job, and that's, I think, absolutely, people have tried for years with club moss to use steel, drag harrows and chisels and different sorts of plows to do that, and there's with mixed results, but it's very expensive and it's hard on your soil structure, and it's very expensive in a variety of ways. This is a way to use your animals. That system has evolved with animals and get them out there and use them as a tool. And you can do that with horses, you can do it with sheep, you can do it with whatever you got, but it requires some thought and trying to find a way to make it work. So again, if maybe things are a little wet or it's winter and you're feeding, use those horse hoofs to break that stuff up and see what happens. Do a little experiment, see how tight do they have to be, or will single bale, will that work? What does it look like after they're done? And start messing around with it. Other than that, in club moss, it's either going to take periods of time that we just haven't seen because we haven't been here long enough, and we won't be here long enough to see, or it takes steel, and I don't think you probably, or really awful chemicals, and I don't think you want to get involved with either of those options. So I'd say try to do it with the horses. At the same time, though, doing all the things we've talked about to make sure those individual grass plants are as healthy as possible that are surrounded by that club moss, then in combination, hopefully they're going to get more robust, and at the same time you can break that stuff up and find places for new plants to get established. Club moss doesn't like shade, so if you have big healthy plants or you have litter on the ground that's shading that stuff out, that's going to help to get rid of it. And it doesn't like the disturbance, it doesn't like getting peeled up. It doesn't have a deep root system like a grass plant, it's just shallow. It just takes advantage of that quick, easy moisture right on the top. So if you can get it broken off from that, then it doesn't do very well. But these guys have done an awesome job. The plants where they've done this are just so beautiful, big green, blue bunch, and some of your taller statured bunch grasses. If they're not grazed, or there's no disturbance for a period of time, we call it wolfy plants. Like the inside starts to die, it shades itself out, and it starts to get thatchy, and there's a lot of organic matter. And in that case, you want to stimulate, either with grazing, or if you didn't have access to animals, mowing is an option. You'd ask about fire, and sometimes there's opportunities for fire to stimulate these old stands that have gotten really wolfy. In a lot of cases, though, it's just rest. It's a matter of, if the plant doesn't look that way, if there isn't a lot of accumulated debris that's choking it out, it's just time to let it rest and let those other plants come back in. If the community has shifted to a place that you don't want it, it's a lot of, say, cheatgrass and knapweed, then you have to take more drastic measures. That's not going to change on its own. Unless you have a lot of blue bunch, but it's intermixed with those things. If it's gone, if it's just undesirable species, then you have to start looking at more intensive things, whether it's chemicals or fire, or going down some of these other roads. The first thing, though, is grazing management and rest. I don't know if that helped. I'd have to see it to know what species are there and what I'd recommend, but
I would think that clipping it like he was talking about and spreading the foliage out over the soil would be
absolutely, yeah.
beneficial and more so than burning, wouldn't it?
I would prefer that over burning. Sometimes, though, we get in a situation, and again, because it depends on species. If it's bunch grasses, I agree with you, but sometimes like in our, over the years, a lot of people have wanted to fence out riparian areas or wetland areas. And after a few years, you see, oh man, it's all squashed itself, and it's so thatchy that we've lost a lot of the diversity in the plant health. And then it's all laid down and matted, and you can't really get in there to mow it. So you either got to come in with livestock and rejuvenate that, or you have to go look at maybe fire. So it just really depends on the grasses that are there, the plants that are there as far as which way. But in a bunch grass, I agree with you completely. If you could mow it, put that litter on the ground, feed the soil, keep the moisture there, and provide better sites for a seedling to germinate, and that would be ideal. But you wait till the plants mature. And yeah, Dan.
Yeah, Dan, using a pasture harrow is a real good way too to get the seed back into the soil if you're not grazing.
Yep, you could pull different implements to knock the seed down, get it good contact with the soil, also to break up thatch if you've got access to that, and there's certainly opportunities for that.
I'll ask a follow-up question. I know very little about the harrows that might work. This is real rocky stuff. Is there a particular type of harrow that ought to be used for that to try and scratch it down and reseed it?
Well, it's going to depend again on what species are there and what you can make something, you can make something out of old fence panel, pile some tires or rocks on just to get that disturbance, to scatter that litter and get the seed in the ground. So you could go all the way from a homemade rig to, there are harrows out there that work in really rocky soils, but they're expensive and they're heavy, so you need pretty good equipment. So there's a wide spectrum of options there depending on what you're trying to do.
Come on down, I'll show you.
Okay.
Place for you, huh?
So I guess let's jump back. How much time do we have?
We're right at.
Are we at time? Okay. So
You're right, it's a lot of info.
we did a quick run through just on the numbers so you kind of get an idea of where to get started. And then if you were going to say, use electric fence on this, say, I don't want any more permanent fence, I want to subdivide with electric, you would just go through and you kind of ballpark, this is about 15 acres. So say you want to do 15 moves across it, okay? So each one's an acre, so you've got X number of pounds. You can say, well, I'm going to be in here for about this many days. March across here, and if you still have moisture, if you're moving across here in 2 days per pasture, right, that's a month. So then you've given this 30 days rest, which is plenty of rest for a lot of our grasses to get some more above ground biomass, rebuild those roots. So you might have the opportunity to come back to that if we still have moisture and you've met those parameters that you're looking for, the height and the regrowth. On some dry land settings though, there's not going to be any regrowth. Moisture's come and gone. Your soil has very low water holding capacity, and that's when you just have to be comfortable saying, that's it. That's what produced. I'm in the high desert. This is a tough place to graze, and it's time to feed hay. And then it's more recreational. You let them out to run around for an hour or two here and there, and keep a close eye on that grass. But the hardest thing about small pasture management is it's coming to terms with the fact that around here it just doesn't produce that much. It's very tough. We're not in Missouri, and so it's a hard realization a lot of times for people to say, this isn't ever going to be really good pasture. It's going to be a place to get some exercise, get a few mouthfuls, but it's not going to meet a very large portion of their feed requirements for the year or even maybe the month. And so that's what you got to do is look at these numbers and look at what you're seeing on the ground and decide what's available, and then after that, what am I going to do? And that's where your contingency plans come in and your monitoring to make sure that you're not causing any further harm. Because you want to maximize what is there. Even if it isn't a huge forage resource, you want to make sure it's producing at its potential or as close as you can get to its potential. So make sure you fall back on all those fundamentals and the principles there to make sure that even if it's 2 acres, that you're getting the most out of those 2 acres that you can. Yes?
Dan, what do you consider small pasture? Like, what's your range, an acre up to? I mean, what is your range?
And it's going to be in the eye of the beholder. I mean, it could be an acre. There's people that have, a really dry 100 acres. You can, as a friend of ours, Nick's got 5 cows, and he was looking at some ground we were looking at, and it was, I can't remember how many acres, but he only had, for 5 cows, I think he could only be on there for like 2 weeks, and it was a big chunk. It was like, I don't know, 40, 80 acres, something like that. So it's all kind of depend on the productivity of the ground as far as what you can do. But small is, anything where you're not meeting the animal's needs for the year. You're not, you're limited, and where you have a really high likelihood of doing harm quickly. So on a large landscape, it takes a lot longer to impact it. But on a small area, whether it's 1 acre or even 10 or 20, if they're brittle, dry, brittle environments, you can change it really fast. And so I guess that didn't really answer your question, but that's kind of the type of land unit we're talking about. Is something that's, where you're limited, very limited.
Okay.
But all the principles are the same. If it's 10,000 acres or 1 acre, all this holds true. It's just a matter of math, is figuring out how long it's going to last you for how many animals. Yes, sir.
We just took over 3 or 4 acres, and it hasn't been used for a number of years. And it's got a lot of tall dead grass, matted down, some rabbit bush in it. What's the best way to start with that?
Well, what is your end goal to have it be horse pasture? Well, you have to decide, what do you want it to be? Is it native, do you know? If there's rabbit brush, but sometimes that creeps back.
Crescent wheat in there.
Crescent.
There's some other bunch grasses, I think it's mostly native.
Okay, so if that's what you want, you say, I want to make this the best bunch grass pasture that it can be. Then you start looking at these things and say, what do these grasses need? And then what should be, or so is rabbit brush a large part of that, or a large part of that plant community? Would it have been historically? Because if it is, it's going to keep coming back. And so what you want to do is live with it and say, this is the potential of my soil and of my site, and we're going to work with that. If it's an invader like broom snakeweed and it's 50% of the production, you're going to say, we got to get rid of that because that's not supposed to be like that, and then look at different ways of controlling it.
Would you do anything with the matted grass this year?
I would graze it. I would, if I could. If I knew somebody with animals that would use it, if you could bring a bunch of cattle in quickly, and they'll probably need some supplement to want to use some of that old dead stuff, but if you get that disturbance and get them to clean that stuff up and get all that grass on the even playing field, you'd be awesome. If you just got horses to work with, then just move them real tight and get them to try to use that. And if not, even if they don't eat it, if they're trampling it into the ground and breaking it up, well, it's going to be just as good for that grass to do that and cover the soil. And then just kind of look and see what's there. If it's good bunch grasses, you just want to make sure you're doing the best you can for them. If there's other things that should be there, you want to see there, well, then you might have to make more dramatic steps to getting seed involved. Or
There's fescue in there too, I think.
Is there
You
some?
showed today, yeah.
Yep, and that's kind of what would be expected for most of these native sites. And like you said, a lot of places got planted to crested, and the natives have actually come back. And so we have a mix of crested natives, which makes management hard because the crested can tolerate really early season use, and the natives can't. And so you say, well, how do I use this resource without harming the natives? And it can be really difficult. But again, if you have electric fence and you say, well, this is primarily crested, well, maybe you use that first and then work towards some of your more native spots, or something along those lines. Yes, sir.
It may be very much the same and may be very different, but what I've done on North Willow Creek, and it was heavily grazed and wasn't too good for the creek, but I turned it back to natural, and the stuff is very thick, not all matted down or anything, and yearly it comes back. But should that be removed? Should it be grazed? Would you agree?
Again, it's going to depend on what it looks like, what it's doing. Sometimes those riparian areas can go a long time without much disturbance, and it'll be good to shore up those banks and start to build the soil there again and get things in shape, and then maybe it'll take the grazing down the road. What you don't want to see is when those plants start to lay down on themselves, and you peel it apart, and there's like one tiller here, and one tiller here, and one here. And there's just not a lot of activity that way, not much going back into your soil, not much production, not much root mass to hold those banks. So that's when you start to say, okay, how do I keep this grass active and vigorous? And that's where grazing is an incredible tool. But if you're not seeing those things, if you're still at a point where it's healing and it's covering up bare ground and it's building organic matter, then you can just leave it.
I promise this is the last question.
No, it's fine. Ask
How do
away.
I reach you?
Well, how do you reach me?
How do I find you?
I've got that on here too. Right there.
Even though their office is in Sheridan, they serve this area, so they pretty regularly can be found in our office too. So we're just right across the street.
Yeah, I come over here a lot and happy to, so just call, or if you got questions about any of this, happy to try to answer them. But I don't have all the answers. A lot of it's very dependent on the site and grasses, and a lot of it's experimenting. And, I think as long as you keep all those basic concepts in mind of always doing the best you can for your soil and thinking about that, and then trying out different stuff, you'll be moving in the right direction. Time? Good?
Quarter after.
Okay. Any other questions? You guys are probably ready to go and just quit listening to me.
Thanks, Dan. Make sure we get your surveys back, and thanks for being here. Hope it was worthwhile for you. And we are talking about doing some actual field tours this summer, and I need to sit down and figure out what we're going to do with that. But if you give me your contact info, you'll be updated on whatever shakes out. Okay, thank you.